Gregg Barak joins us. He is the co-founder and North American editor of the Journal of White Collar and Corporate Crime. He is emeritus professor of criminology and criminal justice at Eastern Michigan University. And I'm going to give you the long intro because people should know who you are. I want my listeners to know who you are. And then and then when you come back, we'll do the short intro. Right now, go by Criminology on Trump. Go by Criminology on Trump. It's published by Routledge. And if you don't love this book, I will reimburse you. Go by Criminology on Trump. This is one of many books that Professor Barak has written. He's the author and editor of 20 books on crime, justice, media, violence, criminal law, homelessness, and human rights. These are all the subjects I care about. Some of these titles include Violence and Nonviolence, Pathways to Understanding. Give Me Shelter, A Social History of Homelessness in Contemporary America. And Theft of a Nation, Wall Street Looting, and Federal Regulatory Colluding. And as I said, his newest book is Criminology on Trump. And he has a new opinion piece that I read today about America's culture of violence. Welcome, Professor Gregg Barak. Is it America's culture of violence, or is it just we have to get rid of these AR-15s?
Well, we could get rid of the AR-15s, but it has a lot more to do with America's culture of violence.
We're a violent culture. You texted me. What is that stat you texted me? Make up.
Well, actually, which I texted you. An opinion piece with a lot of data. So which data are you referring to?
America is 4% of the world's population.
Okay. That's not in the opinion piece, but 4% of the population with 40% of the world's guns.
So what do we do? Get rid of Americans or get rid of guns? Or will the guns do that for us?
Well, I mean, from common sense point of view, gun control measures like background checks, licensing, certification, red flags, the banning of military-style semi-automatic weapons, assault rifles, and high-capacity magazines. We need to, do away with all of those. These measures might have had a marginal effect on the 274 mass shootings in the United States since 2009, which resulted in 1,536 people shot dead and another 983 people shot and wounded. However, these victims of military violence represent only a drop in the ocean of gun violence in America. In other words, these legal efforts, even if successful, are not nearly enough to confront America's deeply ingrained culture of violence that cuts across all societal institutions, differentiating once again American exceptionalism. For example, more than 50,000 persons are killed annually with guns in the United States. Comparatively, our homicide rates are from 3 to 10 times higher than the rest of the civilized nations on Earth. With respect to school-aged children, 12 die daily, 365 days a year from gun violence. That means that the vast majority of the 4,400 youth dying annually from gun violence were not related to schools, had nothing whatsoever to do with schools. With respect to, So, for example, since Columbine in 1989 and through 2021, more than 311,000 children at 332 schools across America have experienced gun violence. This includes at least 554 shooting victims and 185 children, educators, and staff members who have been killed in these assaults. In sum, when we combine all the mass shooting murders on and off campus in the United States, the amount that they account for less than 1% of all the annual gun deaths in the United States. Got to keep that in perspective. All the mass shootings on and off campus throughout the country amount to 1% of all the gun deaths in America. So while we may address that, and while these may affect those killings, and when you have as many weapons of mass destruction in out there at large, you can stop 18-year-olds for buying it. But keep in mind, those 18-year-olds that went to Buffalo and went to Uvalde, they had enough, premeditation to put it together. They would have found those weapons without going into the store and purchasing them, because there are just too many of them. So if you wanted me to go a step further, and I know I would be shot for saying this, we need to have those people turn those guns in, and we should pay them. We should get rid of all the assault rifles in America, but that's not going to happen. Okay, now where we're going with this, which I'm thinking of is reframing this discussion. What needs to be understood is that gun violence and other forms of violence in America are symptomatic of what H. Rap Brown articulated when he retorted to a reporter's questioning at a press conference in 1967. Quote, "Violence is a part of American culture. It is as American as cherry pie." In other words, the cultural and social problem of violence in America, which is exemplified by gun violence, also includes annually 150,000 drug overdoses, more than 10 million victims of domestic violence, more than 500,000 persons living in a state of homelessness, and 31 million without health care. There's your picture of violence of America. And when you look at it that way, unless you're addressing those aspects of violence, you're not touching the deaths from violence in this country. Think about
where have you been? Where have you been?
Where have I been?
Why haven't you been on the show? Where have you been?
Well, I have been on this show once before. Well, that's a good question. I mean, if you want me to address that, you have to ask yourself, all the violence and crime in America, we hear from everyone. Why don't we hear from criminologists? I'm not the only criminologist out there. There's about 3,500 in the United States that could handle these problems and could talk about this in the same way in which I'm doing it. And yet, you don't hear from criminologists. Like Rodney Dangerfield says, we get no respect.
What is a criminologist?
What is a criminologist? Is a person who studies crime and crime control, studies, where these crimes came from in terms of becoming against the law, and why do certain harms become criminal, others civil, some are torts, some are administrative. Why do we break them up into those categories? Why is most of the harm and injury civilly held accountable or through torts when corporate crime is responsible for millions of deaths annually around the world, but nobody's being prosecuted for murder? They might be held accountable, for a wrongful death, but they're only going to pay some money. They're not going to.
This is interesting because I was just going to ask you how you felt about the shooting. That's how it feels but we're going to have to deal with facts. instead of
how do I feel about this? I'm
joking,
so
I'm
pissed
making
off. Okay.
I'm making a joke.
But, well, I mean, you're a very funny man. We know that. Yeah.
What role does spending $1 trillion a year on an imaginary enemy play in all this? Who is making the AR-15s, the Bushmasters? The government can't crack down on assault weapons because we need to make assault weapons to aid our military for these imaginary enemies. So, what is the connection between the military-industrial complex and the NRA?
I mean, I wouldn't pretend to be an expert on that subject, but the obvious relationships are the National Rifle Association is a front, a voice for the producers of weapons, or the military-industrial complex, as you've defined it. I mean, let's say we do need these weapons for real or imaginary enemies outside of the United States. We don't need those weapons internally. We don't have to sell them. But hey, we're the biggest producers and distributors of weapons of all kinds throughout the world. We're number one.
So what you told me was terrifying. You're right. I mean, I've been in denial about how violent Americans are. Are we violent, or are we made to be violent because it's in the best interests of the ruling class?
I'm not even so sure.
It's money off violence, right?
Okay, we're not born. We're not born violence. We're made. Okay, we're made violent. And I wouldn't argue that it's necessarily on behalf of the ruling class. I don't know that this is all that good for the ruling and the ruled. Either way, I don't think it.
But don't you think they want us killing each other instead of them?
Yeah, in terms of classic class warfare, maybe that's the case. But I don't think they're that malicious, or I don't think it's that kind of intent. I don't think that that's what they're necessarily about. But to your question about, are we born this way, or is our culture produced this way? The answer is that, the latter. We have produced the violence that we're reaping. I mean, think about it. What does it mean culturally to have a president of the United States and other high-ranking Republican officials celebrating a white teenager who fatally shot two demonstrators and injured a third in Wisconsin? And what does it tell you about U.S. culture when 40 million Americans learned that the seditionist in chief not only wanted to know why the National Guard could not shoot the Black Lives Matter demonstrators after the police killed George Floyd, but who was also endorsing hang Mike Pence chants after the vice president had been briskly escorted by security out of the Capitol building, and these Republicans are still all in. That's freaking insane.
Yes.
Okay. And these guys are a bunch of schmucks and gals. Finally, if you want to unpack violence in America, this is what you have to address. If you don't address patriarchy, if you don't address domestic abuse, if you don't address bullying, if you don't address gun culture, if you don't address white supremacy, you don't address racism, and ultimately you don't address the militarization of law enforcement in America, you ain't got a chance. All of those things reproduce more and more violence. You have to address all of those. That's the root of violence in America.
Wow. We are progressively more violent, right? We've
We,
gotten
meaning the United
the
States?
United States. Gun deaths are at record highs. Drug overdoses, as you say, are at record highs.
Drug overdoses certainly at record high. Gun killings are moving upward clearly, and the purchasing of weapons are going through the roof since Sandy Hook.
Right.
Just going through the roof. 40 million in 2 years since the pandemic. I mean, this is crazy. It's like Texas's response, hey, we need more cops. We need teachers to be cops, as you just said. I mean, my God, what morons. At CSPAC or tomorrow or Saturday, whenever they're getting together, they're not going to allow any guns. How come? They're not going to allow guns in the room. How come they're just not all coming with their guns to take care of it? I mean, they're so full of crap.
We are full of crap. And the media doesn't, there are no debates. There are no debates. Bernie, by the way, is going to be debating Lindsey Graham on Fox. Fox
Really?
stage. Yeah, I just read. So that'll be interesting.
On violence, on guns, on
I'm not
going to debate.
I'm not sure.
Oh, okay.
I will say this: when Bernie's on Fox or Ralph Nader's on Fox, they give them all the time they want. They get to say whatever they want.
Well, that's interesting, because when you asked earlier, I made all the podcast shows, but I haven't made it up to cable, and I certainly haven't made it into prime time. But my publicist is now working on a new pitch to Fox and Tucker for the same reasons that you just said. I mean, I thought that was, that's where I want to go. I didn't think so, but she said, what do you think? I said, all right, let me hear the pitch. She's working on it.
I can imagine, I hate to say this, Tucker Carlson agreeing with you that we are a violent culture, that we are the most violent culture in the world by the numbers per capita. The violence we do to each other, not just with guns, as you say, healthcare, the way we are willing to just sit back and watch our neighbors die because they don't have a safety net. And it makes you crueler. You think that there is this, at some point we wake up, but that doesn't seem to happen in history, does it? People don't wake up and go, you know what, we're wrong. The myth of Roosevelt, the myth that Americans woke up after the stock market crashed and Hoover ushered in the Great Depression. The myth that I was raised on was, Americans learned it's wrong to be greedy and unregulated banking is dangerous. And Roosevelt came in and saved the nation. And then you go study this and you realize, no, they fought him tooth and nail, that there was no lesson learned.
There was no lesson learned. And when they could unravel that, they did with Ronald Reagan and company. They totally dismantled that. And that's what we're living with today, the consequences. And each Republican generation, and even the Democrats in the 90s, did one better in terms of law and order and in terms of making, welfare recipients work for their meals, et cetera, et cetera.
So we have Joe Thompson coming up. They are 19. They are a Starbucks organizer. They successfully organized several union Starbucks shops have gone union because of them. They are running for state assembly, representing the Santa Cruz district in California. I am listening to a lot of people under the age of 30. They have ideas. They know we're full of shit, that we destroyed everything for them. They don't show us the respect we don't deserve. When you were watching Joe Biden speak about the gun, I call him our funeral director in chief. he was pretty much saying, I understand your pain. I know what it's like to suffer. And you'll be hearing this speech a few more times before I'm thrown out of office, because there's nothing I'm going to be able to do about these guns. When you're pushing 80, you're done. You're out of ideas. He should not be president. And everyone in the Senate and Congress is a victim of their own expertise. They could tell Joe Thompson a million reasons why Starbucks will never go union. What are the fresh ideas? What is an original idea coming down that will solve this gun problem? I don't hear original ideas. I see some civil lawsuits. I've noticed that some of the gun manufacturers are being sued, but I have a feeling the Supreme Court is going to overturn any civil ruling against the gun manufacturers, because they're exempt by law from paying out civil damages, aren't they?
I thought they have. I thought there have been cases recently where the gun manufacturers have been held liable, sort of analogous to if you are a bartender and you give somebody
right or tobacco.
I thought that part of the law was evolving, but I'm not a lawyer.
I'm not sure either, but that sure seems like something we should be doing, is just suing the gun, Remington and Smith and Wesson.
Wesson. They shouldn't have an exemption. This is true. Yeah. Corporations shouldn't be persons either.
Right. What is the best solution that you've heard for the gun violence?
To stop people from getting these powerful military weapons and accessories, and to collect those back. But ultimately, I don't think that will significantly matter, because as I've tried to present here, the vast majority of killings, 99%, don't have anything to do with these weapons of mass destruction. They're handguns, typically. So we need to at least lock those handguns up, or parents need to at least lock their handguns up, at least. Right. That might do something, because most of the killings are by family members either doing suicide or getting into a fight and doing out each other. It's all domestic for the most part.
So I think what you're saying, and I agree with you, as horrible as Tuesday's shooting is, it's an act of terrorism. An act of terrorism is more about the show and terrifying people than it is about the numbers of people who die. And more people are dying, you're saying, every day. How many 100 kids die per day from gun violence?
12 kids die every day, 365 days a year, or some 4,400 deaths. The number one killing factor isn't automobiles, isn't health, it's guns. That's the number one killer of youth in America.
So we have to, my God, what happened in Buffalo and what happened on Tuesday and what's going to happen next week, you see it on television. It's so upsetting, but in a way, hearing you, it does cloud our judgment. It clouds our thinking. We're not seeing the bigger problem.
Although they're interconnected. They're not really separate problems. They're part of the same problem. But people, are zeroing in on really the out of bounds area of violence. Most of the other violence is pretty well accepted and not even considered. So that how many of the people who are talking about this are pointing out all of the violence in the streets?
Right.
Many people are. Don't misunderstand me. But the political focus is not on the day-to-day violence of guns. It is with something that is horrifying, and I'm not, it's significant, but it's significant, and it will continue for the same reasons that we have those other problems. It is far more structural and institutional than it is personal. Okay. We got, 40 crazy kids that did this. There'll be 4,000 crazy kids to replace them tomorrow.
Right. Right. As a criminologist, how would you advise the media to cover these events? Should we be covering Joe Biden flying down there and being our funeral director in chief? That's not news. That doesn't move the needle. That's not important. Should we be covering the grieving, or should we be focusing more on?
I think the grieving is important, not so much Joe flying down. I mean, he doesn't have to go. We all know his routine. I mean, and he's sincere, and it's nice that he does that. And I'm not saying that it's not important. It is. I think it's much more important. And I will give, a shout out to many of the media stations that are doing these personal profiles of all of the children and their family. I think that is a meaningful response.
But would it be better? But wouldn't this country and wouldn't those children be better served if they did profiles on Wayne LaPierre and all the Republicans who take money from the NRA, and what the polling shows that most Americans want meaningful gun control?
Yeah. I think that would be.
Isn't that
I think that would be. I think that would be. Just desserts, as they say.
Isn't there something offensive to Anderson Cooper putting a grieving parent on national television and kind of treating them like exploiting them? That's exploitation. I
mean, there's a fine line there. I mean, I know the exact scene that you're referring to, where he touched and stroked the man a few times as he was speaking. I thought the man was, amazing.
Did that man belong on television? Seems to me Ted Cruz belonged on television.
Yeah, but I get what you're saying, just if we can throw darts at Ted. But that man, I suspect, chose to be there. I don't think that Anderson dragged him on. I think he was a willing person to be there. And I didn't think, I understand what you're saying.
You should be on. We would be better off hearing from you than a perpetual loop of grief, because they're making money. This is exploitation. Anderson Cooper is making millions a year. And he was Wednesday, no, it was Tuesday. Anderson Cooper had one of the Parkland kids on, not David Hogg, another kid. And it was right after Biden's speech. And this kid, and I mean kid, I think he was like 20, comes out came out of the gate and just started going after Joe Biden's speech. And he says, Anderson, there are several executive orders that Joe Biden has that he could issue right now to make these schools safer, but he won't do it with a stroke of a pen. And Anderson listens, and his response is, how does it feel today? Were you brought back to that day in 2018 when you were running? Did it bring back your emotions? And I was watching with my mother, and my mother, I won't tell you the word she used to describe Anderson Cooper. I mean, she went that MFer. Talk about the executive orders. Tell us what Joe Biden could do today.
Right. Well, let's face it. He's a pretty boy, but he, doesn't have a lot of, upstairs in serious news journalism. Okay, but I like him.
That's why he's on CNN. Well, we have to wrap it up. I'm going to ask my audience to do me a favor, and we want Professor Barak to keep coming back. You said some things today that I just thank you. Please go buy Professor Barak's latest book, Criminology on Trump. We have the January 6th hearings coming up in a couple of weeks, big hearings. So
I'd like to cover them with you.
Yeah, I'd love you to come back every week. Go to greggbarak.com, and please, one of the ways I get people to come back is if you go and buy 10 copies of Criminology on Trump and give them to your friends and libraries. Give the books to libraries. That's the best way to support this show, is by going to greggbarak.com or wherever they sell Criminology on Trump and buy 10 copies of this, read it, and then we can get to have them come back. My listeners do buy books. They don't read them, but they buy books. So
that's like a lot of us.
There's a Japanese word. I have to look it up. There's a condition Japanese have a word for of people who buy books but don't read them. A book comes out and they have to, and it's kind of a problem I have.
Well, if you let me do a plug, there's the book, because David hasn't shown you the book. And when they tell you, usually you can judge a book by its cover. Here you go.
Yes. Thank you, Professor Barak. How do people contact you? How do people go to greggbarak.com?
You can contact me at greggbarak.com at Yahoo.
Okay.
No, I mean Gregg.Barak at yahoo.com. That would be an easy way to do it. People.
And on Twitter, do you still tweet? Do you tweet? Yes, you do.
I do some tweeting.
Yeah, Gregg Barak on Twitter. I follow you. GreggBarak. Thank you, Professor. I hope to see you real soon. Thank you. Great conversation.
Take care.
A lot to chew over, the idea that we're more violent than we realize.